We've all been quite content to demean government, drop civics, and in general conspire to produce an unaware and compliant citizenry. The unawareness remains strong, but compliance is obviously fading rapidly. This problem demands some serious thinking, and not just poll-driven, demographically inspired messaging. I really need to stop reading WikiLeaks because all it does is make me angry. Hi, welcome to Progressive Soup. I am not David Stevenson. I am filling in for him this week. Normally in that chair, I'm over here. I am Mark Morash. Joining us today, two Green Party candidates from the Stamford area, Cora Santaguida, who is running for the 27th State Senate, and Rolf Maurer, who is running for the Registrar of Voters in Stamford. We are going to talk about voting and alternate parties and all of the things that should get you riled up to keep being active from now until the next 400 years. So here we go. Cora Santaguida, Rolf Maurer, tell us about you a little bit about what you're running for. We'll go to the two of you, and then I got some questions for you about what you're running for, and we'll work from there.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I grew up in Greenwich, so I'm a Connecticut native, and I've been living in Stamford since 2010. Joined the Green Party in 2012, ran for local office that year, Board of Education, Board of Representatives, District 9, 2013, Board of Education again, 2014, took a break in 2015. And this year, I am actually, in addition to running for State Senate in the 27th District, I'm also the state coordinator for the Stein-Baraka presidential campaign. I've been really busy with that.
And I should make mention that I am now on the take because I was provided totally ridiculously amazing swag. So just so you know, I have been paid off by a shirt, buttons, and a sticker, and it works every time. Anyhow, go ahead. Thank you.
I think I'm fired. No, I'm kidding. One of the great things about the Green Party, and probably the best thing to me, is that by principle, it's consistent. So, we run candidates from dog catcher all the way to President of the United States. We all follow the 10 key values. Jill Stein is running this year. She ran in 2012 as well. But if you look at pretty much all of her down ticket candidates, through the Green Party of the United States, they really adopt the same things. I find that I use a lot of stuff from Jill's platform and connect it to my platform because it makes sense locally. A lot of the things she says. Obviously, I can't cancel student debt. That's something different. But we can certainly support many other things. So. I guess I could talk a little bit about my platform. Yes? No?
Yeah, let's have Rolf go ahead and do an introduction, and then I've got a question, actually,
Sure.
a comment about the consistency of the Green Party. I think it ties together, and then we'll do some platform as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm Rolf Maurer, and I'm running for Registrar of Voters in Stamford. I've been involved with the Green Party since 2009. I've been involved with supporting other candidates, I guess, since about 2004. So I think this is about the 11th time I've run for a different office. And every time, as I say, every time I run for office, I learn something new about the process, different facets of different levels of government. I guess the highest level that I've run for was as running as a candidate 2 years ago for treasurer and comptroller. One of them was a write-in. Last year, I ran for Board of Education, and that was the first time I ran for that, but there were some scandals going on in the school system, and normally there are about, there are 3 candidates this year. Sometimes there are 3, there are 5 positions. That time there was like 12 or 13 candidates.
13. Yeah.
And
3 years, and then 2 special elections because so many folks had resigned, correct?
Yeah.
There were some 1-year tickets, and then, yes, 3 years. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the debate table looked like, What do you think?
The interesting thing is that there was such a huge clump of Democrats and Republicans. Because there were so many people involved, it was interesting that they were desperately trying to distinguish themselves from one another. And normally they don't have to work that hard because there aren't that many running. So in a way, I guess it helped single me out as a third-party candidate more than in the past. So I find that one of the big platform points for me is instant runoff voting. That kind of segues into my researching, understanding how it provides more opportunities, more choices, more voices for people in elections.
No, it's just talking of registrar of voters. We all know what a state senate campaign is, essentially. As a registrar of voters, generally Stamford has two. They have a person who registers the Democrats and a person who essentially registers the Republicans.
Right.
Yet we're living in an age where nearly 40% of the voters out there are independent, not the two major parties in some way, shape, or form. So how would that change things to have a Green Party candidate as one of the registrars of voters in Stamford?
Well, it's funny because when we were collecting petitions for Jill Stein to get her on the ballot in Connecticut, the Republican registrar was the one that received them because their perception is that the Democrats are too ideologically similar, I guess, to the Greens. I don't know. Well, of course, they're the dominant party in the state. But if there's a Green registrar of voters, I'd like to think that might be serve as the recipient for other third, fourth party candidates that are running for office, because since we're outside the duopoly, we'd be more sensitive, receptive to their situation, what they're dealing with.
In some sense, you could be a beacon, and in some way that would bring all of those independent voters into a party for those who may or may not want to. But as we saw, of course, in the primaries, being registered as a something becomes very, very important. Otherwise, the two parties kind of take control of the fate of folks like him.
Right, yeah.
So we're going to come back to in terms of voting and the ideas you have of how to change how voting happens. Let's step back. Go ahead, talk about your platform a little bit. We'll keep going back and forth.
Well, in regards to voting, I have some stuff about voting in my platform as well. One of the things being, and this is a struggle with third parties all the time, changing the way write-in campaigns go at the polls. There is no uniform process. Poll workers certainly do not volunteer that information. And even when you ask for it, you either get inconsistent information or no information at all, inaccurate. And the other thing in regards to voting, I'd like to really change the legislation where people on parole can vote. Currently, in the state of Connecticut, you need to be out of that system. You can be on probation, but most certainly not in prison or on parole. And there are two states. I think Vermont is one of them where you can actually vote in prison.
Well, the thing we hear all the time is the trope of, well, you've served your time. Well, if you're a felon and you've served your time, you don't get your voting rights back in most of the country. And that's a ridiculous thing that we propagate this myth of you've served your time, now come back to society, and in some way you really don't. Personally, everyone needs the right to vote. If you're a citizen of this country, you have a right to vote. Right.
And the thing is, it's a domino effect of it's devastating because you find people with a criminal record, they're not eligible for benefits, whether it be public assistance, housing. So, and it's kind of like, well, how do I change this? Oh my goodness, I can't vote either. And then they wonder why people, perpetually just stay down on their luck. Well, why aren't you working? Well, gee. Really?
I have a record.
Right.
Well, and in the same regard, when we talk about having over 2 million people incarcerated, having more folks incarcerated in the U.S. than any other country, the private prison system, which essentially makes money off of people, you start to realize that there's the potential that folks are being put in prison so that they can't vote. And it begins to completely change the demographic of who can vote.
Sure. And as far as, mass incarceration. I'm green, so I am in favor of legalization, ending the war on drugs. Really, I agree completely with Jill Stein, who is a medical doctor. The only thing dangerous about marijuana is the fact that it's illegal. So, get these people who are in prison for minor offenses out. And also, I guess, talk a little bit about housing. So with housing in Stamford, especially new developments and existing developments, they have a certain number of units that are designated for low market rate. And it's pretty grim. There are very few in each building, and there's a lottery. And the program, the low market rate program, is run by the Department of Health and Social Services in the city of Stamford. And the thing is, even if a new development comes up, I think these management companies or whomever, they have the opportunity to pay an in lieu fee. So no low-income families or individuals are going to live in their building. They're going to pay some sort of a fee. They say, oh, what it's designated for, we don't know where that money goes. Maybe it's okay, maybe not. And then education. I'm most definitely against Common Core. I saw something in the paper probably about a month ago. They were comparing, all the test scores from last year for Connecticut by town and city. And my district covers part of Stamford and part of Darien. And the differences were just, oh my goodness. And it's most definitely a different income bracket, which is also why I'm in favor of the funding for schools coming from Hartford, because there's an unfair balance in regards to the quality of education when you rely on property taxes.
Yeah, and we talked about that actually on the show a few weeks ago, because there had been a judge in Connecticut who was looking at and saying, what you've done to advance this isn't good enough. They were talking about the difference between Fairfield and Bridgeport, and we brought up on the show how Bridgeport had to cut busing for their high school students because they didn't have the money. And you think, kids can barely get to school when there is a bus. Imagine in the middle of winter and they're having to get to school and there's no busing for them. You're not going to go.
Exactly.
So thinking now, something you brought up, I want to ask to you, because for you, what was it to get on the ballot as a Green Party candidate?
For Registrar of Voters,
yes.
We already had the ballot line.
You did already have,
Yeah.
so as it goes, you have to have 1% of the number of votes that happened in the previous election. Mm-hmm. In the case of your seat, that's happened at least twice that I was able to see that the Green Party has had over 1% for the 27th state seat. So you're able to get on it. Do you see part of what you're doing? Obviously you're running, you want to win. But do you also see what you're doing and encouraging other folks to run as a way of getting the Green Party on more and more ballots on a consistent election after election basis?
Yeah, that's definitely our goal.
Well, yeah, I mean, Connecticut actually this year is running the most local candidates in this election in the New England region.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, we're it. No, the other states are amazing as well. And in fact, there's going to be a rally on October 30th in Boston, Jill Stein, and all of the states in New England will be there. But yeah, we are running, I think, 26, local state offices.
6 of which are state Senate seats that have Green Party candidates. Of the, I believe it's 36, 37 in Connecticut, there are 6 that have Green Party candidates, so that's quite something.
And we have national candidates as well.
Yeah.
Jeff Russell, State Senate, Mike DeRosa, Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Go ahead and talk about your platform and voting a little bit.
Well, researching about voter registration, part of it has to do with my own experiences in previous runs, having to deal with the office, going up with other Greens to visit Denise Merrill's staff about issues. But the two things that most attract me about the Registrar of Voters position that can, as from a reformative perspective, is instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. And taking a second look at the whole gerrymandering redistricting issue. Those 2 points are very closely related. So when people go to the polls, they're very bitter if they go, as you mentioned, the 40% of people that are just disconnected from the Democrats or Republicans because they don't see that there's any voice for them. So they want more candidates. And I've run for offices, and I didn't even put together a platform yet, and yet a polling organization found out that I was already polling like at 9%. And then later on, a month later, another polling organization said it was 12%. And I hadn't even done anything. So people have an appetite for this. And in another instance, in 2012, I think we had 8 candidates running for Green Party in Connecticut, in Stamford alone, maybe 15 around Fairfield County, and of course Jill Stein was running the first time. Well, the voters guide for Stamford, Connecticut didn't list a single one of us, not one. And yet they had the nerve to say that this thing, every year they say, this is what you need to be informed when you vote.
So in terms of them not listing you, this is, I believe, what Denise Merrill, Secretary of the State of Connecticut, refers to as a mistake, where she says, and this was a press release that came out on October 21st, I'm going to read a portion of it. In response to recent suggestions that the presidential election could in some way be compromised, she came out with a quote, and she says how people, were looking for free and fair elections. And she says at the end here, mistakes can be made and errors do occur. However, none of these alter the outcome of our elections. Now, to me, as an editor, I look at mistakes can be made and errors do occur. However, none of these alter the outcome of our elections. They're kind of contradictory sentences there. And so you come here, I've seen this, you say that none of the Green Party candidates were in the voting guide in the last set of elections. I have to believe that the Greens not being in the voter guide could have had an effect on the election.
Right. And that year, in Stamford, Hartford, Bridgeport, and 2 other cities in Fairfield County, the write-in votes for Jill Stein were just ignored. They weren't included. And this is a felony. You can go to prison, you can pay a fine, but all Denise Merrill said to the offending registrars is, well, don't do it again. And of course, Cora's mentioned how poorly trained the poll workers are. Like the last time I voted, I had a write-in candidate. It was on one of these, the machines that they use, the scanning machines. So between the person that was in charge explaining what I should do and the person manning the machine that I was supposed to slip the paper in, they made a mistake, and they had to open it up and pull it out, and I had to put it in the appropriate slot. And one time I wanted, I think it was Cynthia McKinney, I don't remember. I asked to vote for her. I wanted to put her in as a write-in, and the man didn't know what I was talking about. So quickly he defensively said, well, there's no such thing as a write-in. So the other one had to come to the rescue and says, well, yeah, there was, of course, this is how you do it.
And of course, in Connecticut, they only audit 5%. And what you're talking about is exactly why there needs to be something in place for audits to happen across the board, and why it's one of the many things that, even though the elections are November 8th, November 9th, there's work to do. Things need to be audited. Things need to be double-checked. During the Democratic primary here in April, I wound up having to go to one of the polling locations in Danbury at the request of Bernie's campaign to get voter tallies, because when they were calling, the registrar was refusing to give them vote tallies. And of course, any citizen can walk in off the street and say, show me the numbers. And so essentially what you're doing is going every 2 hours to make sure the number doesn't go down. And to make sure, and this I'm sure has come up as well, that there were enough ballots. Well, they ran out of ballots at one
Bridgeport,
point.
Yes. They were trying to use copies, Xerox copies, and feed them into the machines. Did they forget how many people vote in Bridgeport? Maybe, I don't know.
It was 2008, the first time Obama ran. It was,
and then there's a whole complexity in other states where they use these touchscreen machines. It's ridiculous. ESS systems was it Ohio that was a crucial state in the second run for Bush? The executive, the head of the company, said that, we're using these machines, they're going to be used in Ohio, and we're committed to delivering Ohio to the Republicans. That's a blatant admission that they're going to use this technology to steal the elections. It's part of my platform is like, well, why don't we do what they have in Canada? Why don't we do what they have in New Zealand and just go back to a paper ballot? In New Zealand, it's illegal to do anything more complicated. Now, that's not going to get rid of corruption, of course, but it's easier to ferret it out. Because even if something doesn't go wrong with the code, nobody hacks it, somebody can always just, in essence, pull the plug on the polling site, the power goes out. Well, you have a paper, you have a pencil, you have a box. You don't have to worry about rebooting it or turning on a light. Of course, you need a light to see, but it's very simple to, keep track of that, because you don't have to worry about these dependencies having to do with electronics or just electricity.
You have to go as far as what happened, I believe it was in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago, where a Republican campaign office was set on fire, and the word came out that they had been keeping returned absentee ballots in there, which was illegal. They're supposed to, I guess, go up to a state office, and they had stored a bunch waiting to, whatever, get them passed along. And so, you go to that extreme. Are these the types of things that have you wanting to run as registrar of voters, to be able to try, starting on a local level, to change how this works, to go for things like ranked choice voting? Which, give a quick synopsis of ranked choice voting and what that means to contrast to what we have now.
Well, when I was reading about it, I realized, well, this is what we do for our elections within the Green Party itself. You have various offices. You have offices with, say, 3 people, like the co-chairs. So you vote not just for one person, you vote for several people, and each person is entitled to vote. And he says, well, I prefer this one. If he doesn't make it, I prefer this one in 2nd place, 3rd place, 4th place. So so that way, people that make less than 50% of the vote do have a chance of winning. If it's 50%, then they win. But the current system is, you have one of 2 options. The minimum number of choices, options that constitute a choice. And, in my view, the Democrats and Republicans, there's so much convergence going on about the issues, how they agree to define what an issue is, and then they debate about it, like 2 wrestlers in a SmackDown. They both draw their check from the same company. But in this case, you can have more people involved that feel disenfranchised. Women's interests, if they don't like the position of the Democrat or Republican, or they like the Democrat's position, but they think that they're going to waffle or cave in, well, then there's a 3rd option, or maybe there's a 4th option or a 5th option. Minorities, they have much more of a role, and therefore their interests can be represented, and that encourages more people to actually participate in the elections, because I think currently it's like around 30% of people actually decide the presidential run, typically each election. And there's a whole lot of people left out that are not Democrat or Republican that may not participate. And then there's a whole larger bunch of Democrats and Republicans, maybe they don't vote. Another advantage of it is that it gets away from the stigma of being a spoiler, because that argument only has a slight cachet if you're dealing with just one or the other. But you can't really spoil a system that is designed to already be spoiled. And then, of course, there's the other question of the lesser of 2 evils argument. I mean, you keep voting for somebody bad, then the next round, it's not going to get better. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. I never thought anybody would be worse than George Bush Jr. Now we got Donald Trump. We're already at the bottom of the barrel.
And with ranked choice voting, though, it also it stops the primary process, correct?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, that's another thing.
And so you're skipping the sort of silly season of things, and by ranked choice voting, you're automatically opening up the playing field to a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th candidate, which technically we have right now. Right here in the Connecticut ballot, you only see your Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, and Green, but there are technically registered write-in candidates. There's the PSL Gloria LaRiva's on here, and there's another 4 or 5, but it means that there is access to voting. There are people that align more with what you want to vote for, and it should draw more people out, and certainly not put us in a situation where somebody like Bernie has the ability to have things stacked against him.
Right, and it also saves money, because if you have, I call it the 2-step. You have a primary, then you have a general election. If you just have one election with multiple candidates, and these people are drawn from elections within the parties, it costs the jurisdictions less money. There's less paperwork, less organizing, less money going into it to support this complex process.
Okay, we're getting close. We're going to come back and do a second show. We're going to talk more about your individual campaigns, get into a larger picture. Sure. But in case anyone only sees just the one, take 90 seconds each of you and talk about your presidential candidate and why folks should support her.
Well, Jill Stein is not a career politician. She's a longstanding activist. She's a mother. She's a medical doctor, Harvard educated. She also taught at Harvard. She's been part of environmental causes, since the 90s. She wants to create the Green New Deal. So she'll create 20 million new living wage jobs. and convert us to clean renewable energy by 2030. She also wants to eliminate student debt, make public education free through college, and cut military spending by 50% and have us not be the arms provider, for the world, because 70% of ISIS's weapons come from us, and that is most definitely the truth. And do you want to talk about some of the other points of our platform?
I was just going to talk about what she represents overall, is that she just represents human interest. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, whatever, everybody's a human being, and that's her focus, and the inspiration comes from her being a doctor. She says that she wants to be, represent a sort of medical reparative view of her campaign and what she wants for the country.
Political medicine.
Right, yeah.
To address our current economic and environmental emergency. She wants to declare a state of emergency.
And what I would say is overall with that, with military spending, with the idea of being able to help, really she's the only candidate running right now who steps forward and has used the P word, has used the word peace. Mm-hmm. You don't see it in either of the debates. You hear escalation, you hear war, you hear conflict.
Retaliation.
And it's as if no one has the nerve to actually stand up and say, this can be done. This is how we grow. This is how the world should be for all of us to live in. And for me, I admire that because it almost seems like it's become a four-letter dirty word at this point in time. I joke and I say, ha ha ha, she uses the P word. We all are focused on Trump's P word right now, which is absolutely ridiculous when the P word we should be talking about and always talking about is peace. So, say who you are, say what you're running for, 10 seconds.
Cora Santaguida, State Senate, District 27.
Rolf Maurer. I'm running for Registrar voters in Stamford, and you can find me on the ballot on 6F.
And I am 4F.
With the Green Party.
And I am Mark Morash, filling in for David Stevenson. I am going to go back to reading another 1,000 emails of WikiLeaks between now and our show tomorrow. And by that time, I'm going to have them all memorized. And you'll probably come back and find me still reading them if I'm not asleep in my bowl of soup. Thank you for joining us on Progressive Soup. We've got more Green Party conversation coming up tomorrow. And hopefully we will see you then.